Thank you to everyone who's joining us here today. Welcome to LimaCharlie's first December 2024 presentation, Building a Profitable MSSP, Modern Pricing for Maximum Growth. This is actually going to be a really interesting talk for us to have, primarily because it centers around a few different ways that LimaCharlie does what it does, how we build out our pricing model, how that impacts our customers, how it's available for folks to use. And then how a lot of our managed services customers are able to use that to deliver higher margins, find more value, and really have better control over their costs as well. So as I was kind of putting some content together for this, I came up with this really unique idea of like, you guys are, MSSP and MDRs are having to manage their customers, whilst they're simultaneously having to manage costs. So there's a little bit of like a double-headed management role in that. And anything we could do to make it easier for you to manage your customers is inherently a good thing to have, because you're able to provide more value that way. Anything we can do to help you manage your costs is obviously much better, much better. So I wanted to kind of like highlight the different types of management and the juxtaposition of those that we're going to talk about a little bit today. Now, quick note for everyone here who might be watching. First off, thank you for joining me live. If you are watching it live, if you're watching the replay, it's great to have you here as well. For those of you who are live, we do have a Q&A option available. Feel free to ask questions if you have any as we go through this. I do have some very simple content prepared. This is going to be more of a discussion format into how LimaCharlie does what it does. So there's not really too much in the way of like, hey, can you share your slides, because they're super impactful and stuff. These are more like talking points and high level things. With that said, I do think there is an important discussion to have here in case you are someone inside of an MSSP or an MDR, or some sort of managed services, managed security space, and you want to dig a little bit further into how LimaCharlie does what it does. There's multiple ways to get a hold of me or anyone on the team, really. The LimaCharlie community Slack, just slack.limacharlie.io. Reaching out via email, LinkedIn, or Blue Sky, or any one of those social media avenues is a great way to get a hold of me as well. So I always like to offer that up. I know sometimes pricing questions and strategy questions and stuff can get a little daunting, especially for folks who might be, not really wanting to share all of their details or strategies with other attendees who are watching. But that said, there's lots of ways to get in touch with us. Let's go ahead and bring up our content on stage. The first thing I wanted to bring up and I wanted to talk about is, first off, getting into the idea of setting a path. And the final slide in today's presentation is actually called Charting for 2025. But there's this idea of thinking about what 2025 is going to look like from a competitive landscape. We're going to talk about that in just a moment, why these things are important to have, but really the kind of first call to action that I've got for everyone here for 2025 is going to be thinking about ways that your pricing strategy can be utilized to help find more value with your customers. And what I mean by that is, for anyone who's in the managed services space, we don't really have the option of just like, necessarily just raising prices based on inflation rates every single year or something like that. We've really got to think about ways to add value and scale the business from a managed perspective. And a lot of times, the answer to that has just been, well, let's just hire more people. Well, that doesn't scale very well. And that's a cost that either hits, what is already might be a razor thin margin, or one that you've got to kind of pass down to your customers in the form of higher costs and things like that, which might not be the strategy that you're looking for, number one. Number two, it doesn't scale well. We're going to talk about scalability in a couple of minutes here, but the reason it doesn't scale well is because there's only an infinite number of people who you can actually hire that can add enough value to justify the increase in cost or the increase in kind of product value and things like that. So the other way to look at finding more of a margin is going to be, are there ways I can lower my costs without impacting my service? And that's like my first call to action for 2025 is going to be, are there things I can do? Are there ways that I can look to lower my internal costs without needing to bring on a whole team of people and still offer the same type of value to my endpoint, to my end customers? Where this gets tricky is depending on how your tech stack is built, and we're going to talk about that as well, but depending on how your tech stack is built and constructed, a lot of times this might just mean you're hopping between vendors to try and find the best deal or score the best arrangement that you can. And that doesn't scale well. And the reason I say that doesn't scale well is because you're essentially hopping insurance providers. It's the same exact thing. You're just price comparing every single time a contract is up, and that doesn't really do much for anybody. So I'm going to throw in here, like, my first thing for us to think about is going to be take, what your strategy is going to be for the next year, and really, really think and analyze, am I doing this to find better savings or to find a better cost management that I can subsequently either pass down to my customers or increase as a margin for myself? And it may sometimes seem really straightforward, like, oh, well, obviously, if I lowered costs, I'd have more to go around. But where this gets tough is lowering costs is not always as easy as it sounds. And we're going to talk through that as well. And that's kind of my introduction here for everybody is in 2025, let's think about how can we augment or adjust or align our pricing strategies so that we are actually moving the needle in the right direction for my organization. I'm going to invert that and say simply raising costs because everything else is raising without added value, without added emphasis, without added managed value for your customers is going to unfortunately just increase costs without any sort of justification. It's going to have your customers asking a lot of questions. What am I actually getting for this? And it's going to give an increased competitive marketplace a much better advantage. And that's actually going to be the very next slide that we're going to look at as well, is going to be kind of taking a look at some of the challenges. It's funny, I'm actually giving this webinar today on pricing strategies right on the heels of a pretty important announcement from, I believe, is it SonicWall and CrowdStrike, I think. And just to make sure I'm not speaking, out of turn, if you will, to make sure this is actually the thing, SonicWall and CrowdStrike are partnering to develop a strategy towards small to medium businesses, towards SMBs. Folks, if you're in the managed security space, I'm really hoping that you are seeing and noticing a lot of the A, consolidation, and B, big player entrance into the managed security market. That's going to be one of the biggest challenges in 2025, 100%. And it's not just major vendors getting in with the hopes of being successful. It's price points that they're able to compete with. It's a combination of technology, it's market footprint. And it's not so much like product companies trying their hand at services. It's product companies forming strategic partnerships that they think will give them a leg up on offering services. I say think because there's already quite a few established players in this area, but this doesn't cease to be a big challenge for us in 2025. Now, another thing to consider is that when you are relying on the technology from one of these product companies, from one of these organizations, it is not in their best interest, contracts aside, it is not in their best interest to give you the most competitive pricing. It is in their best interest to actually find ways to lower their costs and raise yours. That way they can potentially go after your customers. Now, I'm not saying this with any sort of like vengeance or any like just making stuff up out of thin air. The number of times we see product companies try to enter a market and use their current managed services customer list as their target list is just simply way too high. The fact that it's larger than zero is way too high. The fact that it's been seen in multiple situations, it's rampant. And you want to make sure as you're forming strategic partnerships and as you're working with tech stacks that they're not about to try and poach your customer list with a lower offering. Another thing that I think we're going to see as an issue in 2025 is going to be a focus of customer needs. It was really easy way back, maybe a few years ago, to really think of a managed service company as managed endpoint, meaning deploy EDR software and we'll kind of offer that MDR or XDR service. I think going forward, we're going to start to see a request and a need for management of other types of platforms or other types of telemetry as first-class sources. Identity management being a big one right now, where I think a lot of times non-EDR or NDR technology is kind of thought of as a bolt-on, meaning like, oh, we offer this as the primary, but we'll take a look at that if you want to as well. Companies are going to start to want managed, they already are wanting managed services across their entire cloud footprint, managed services across their identity access, managed services across their security services as well, with kind of the other things that have been listed there. And I think that's going to change the market. And it's also going to have to change the approach for companies that have been very EDR centric for a long time. The last one that I'll bring up here is once again going to be a kind of reestablished focus on partners turning into competitors. This isn't so much like the big security players entering the space, but this is more of an emphasis on companies that are technology providers potentially spinning up their own managed services for their particular niche product. So, for example, I might have like an identity and access management tool, which is a product that automatically can detect software. I might think of a managed version of that particular tool or of that product offering for my, biggest customers or my top 10, 20 list. That's going to take away from the need for managed services for MSSPs and MDRs to jump in. We're going to want to consider that as a possibility or something to look out for going in the future. So let's talk a little bit about how LimaCharlie brings all this in. One of the big things that you can do to offset some of these challenges and to really kind of take that 2025 bull by the horns and scale product up or scale pricing up is first going to be stepping away from fixed pricing strategies where you've got, okay, we have a staple of a tech stack and we have 3 things that we deploy and 5 things that we monitor. And that's kind of just how the service runs and that's it. I would highly recommend taking a look at value as the value being offered. Where are my customers able to see and recognize their value? And what is it that my team is actually really good at doing? 1. 2, how do we bring in or add additional value, bring in additional data, add additional detection and response capabilities, add in additional managed security services while not breaking the bank and unfortunately taking this approach of let's just sign license agreements with all the things that are out there. Well, one way to do that is to step away from kind of tier or band-based pricing, which locks you in. And instead, I would look at demand-based pricing, which is exactly where LimaCharlie fits in. And of course, we're here today to talk about how LimaCharlie can help you scale towards this. LimaCharlie's pricing model follows very much that of any cloud provider that's out there. You pay for what you use, when you use it, and when you need it. The other thing is our pricing is relatively straightforward, open and transparent. There are scaled discounts, but what's posted on our website is the ceiling. It can go down the more that you bring in. The nice part about that is it allows you to forecast accordingly. This changes, I think, the game for a lot of folks who maybe try to think of, all right, every contract I sign with a customer of my own, I've got to go back to my technology partners and I've got to negotiate, hey, I need to add on an extra X thousand users or endpoints or gigabytes coming in. And unfortunately, it doesn't really help you in predicting or forecasting costs out when you're being put into bands or, kind of strategic buckets based on technology needs. When I worked in a lot of MDR space, only a few years ago, we would sell customers based on predicted endpoint count, predicted endpoint deployment. And if they fell within a certain tier, that meant they would get a certain type of technology to help support that tier. That was really a tech need. They might not have been in a world where they needed all of that horsepower or they needed all of those licenses. The other side of that is they might not have been in a world where they needed that much rigidity in what they did. They didn't need to necessarily have so much hard-coded, limited access to data, limited access to bandwidth, limited access to telemetry ingestion. So one of the other big approaches, one of the other things that I expect to see in 2025, as you're going through and navigating that pricing model, I want you to start to think about what your model would be if it was demand-based on what your customers are utilizing, on what they're actually deploying. Now, there might be a difference of opinions here. And this is probably going to be the most contentious one because it's much easier to go out and say, well, you have 10,000 endpoints. Our price is X number of dollars per endpoint. Therefore, your ultimate price is going to be, X times Y, right? Where that becomes really tricky is what if a customer wants to add on additional services? What if you recognize a strategy in managing other types of data? How do we implement and integrate those? Do we start to charge for user? Do we start to charge for endpoint? Do we start to charge for log gigabyte being brought in? The point being, if you're limited to pricing models and tiers structured by the vendors on which you rely on, you're not really able to scale that up or define a model outside of the corners that they paint you into. Instead, if I'm looking at a tool like, or a platform like LimaCharlie, and I'm able to say, I need to bring in XYZ telemetry, I need to bring in Y number of endpoints, and that number is going to fluctuate. That number is going to change based on my customer needs and my customers' needs. We need to be reflective of that. It's very difficult to kind of retool a pricing strategy if you're already stuck in higher tiers or you're already stuck in paying for something you might not be using. The other thing I'll drop in here as well, when I talked about, necessarily moving away, not entirely moving away, but thinking about value-based versus fixed pricing. This is where I'm going to want to take a strategy of what is it I'm actually offering towards my customers? Where is the value at? And how can I put more dollar signs around that value being offered? In a lot of cases, it is not the underlying tech stack that's going to be the value provided to the customer. It's going to be your insight, threat detection, response capabilities. It's going to be what your team provides to the customer. Base your pricing on, wow, we actually deliver a ridiculous amount of value. How can we build on top of a more cost-effective tech stack? Focus on where we're stronger. The next thing I'll bring up here as a kind of major talking point for us is going to be bringing all these different data sources together and integrating with any types of new data or data feeds that are out there. I'm once again reflecting on that kind of future forward idea of the future of managed services from a security perspective is not going to be EDR or NDR centric. It is going to focus on different data types. It's going to focus on monitoring other things outside of like the standard normal issues. That's going to require building out. It's going to require engineering. It's going to require development in order to integrate all of these products. It's going to require a multi-tenant approach. I don't want data commingling. It's going to require geographic deployments. It's going to require ease of use. And that's where, once again, I think LimaCharlie shines really well. First off, I want my entire security stack to be able to talk to tools, ingesting data, receiving commands, outputting as need be. And having an API first approach is going to be table stakes for that. Call to action for everybody who within the next year needs to revisit or re-sign contracts. Start to ask the questions of the tools and products you use that benefit your team and only your team. Do not ask questions that don't really apply to what your team is doing, number one. Number two, if you encounter a product that doesn't have a thing that your team needs and there is no clear definition of a roadmap for implementation, move on. Straightforward. Second, adding on to that would be an API first capability, because I understand there's integrations that might not exist right now, but my team needs to build them. We need to make them happen. It's the only way we're going to compete in this market is by structuring integrations and structuring data being brought into centralized locations. That's going to allow it, make it easy for us. LimaCharlie is an API first platform. Straight up, we make it super easy to integrate both on ingestion and output, regardless of what it is you're trying to build and structure and put together. I've got LimaCharlie users who utilize the platform. They might never log into the web UI. All the data that flows through is being output to different locations, very API-centric approach where users are not really interacting with the UI. I've got customers who utilize LimaCharlie for long-term monitoring, and they run their entire operation out of GitHub repos, Slack channels, and an occasional email every now and then with some visualization tools. And then I've got other customers who utilize LimaCharlie, but they utilize it in conjunction with other tools very heavily. So they might only need 2 or 3 dashboards to get their job done, as opposed to 15 to 20 dashboards. But it's going to be that API first approach which is going to be critical and making sure that my tools can actually talk to each other. The next thing I want to drop in here, which is going to be a little bit of a revisit, but taking the ideas that we talked about before and standardizing connectivity and thinking about how we would scale costs and thinking about how we're going to scale to align costs more with a service delivery is then going to come into delivering value with better managed costs. Folks, there's going to be multiple ways to cut this down. There's going to be multiple ways to find more in what you're doing. First is going to be, first off, just getting rid of unused licenses or costs that are being passed down to your customers for no reason. If your tech stack is wrapping you into bands, first off, break out of those. 1, 2, don't pass those hidden or sunk costs down to your customer. It's not their fault that the tech stack is built that way. Second, I want to look for ways to eliminate or reduce redundancy across this. I think this needs to be an important element for anybody running managed services in the next year, is going to be analyzing the different data you're receiving from your customers and the different tools they have implemented and what their tech stacks look like. And if there's an opportunity for you to find efficiency or to reduce redundancy to lower costs for them, in that case, you've already won. You've already provided value without even installing or plugging in a certain thing, without even installing or plugging in one particular tool. One. Two, I'm not asking every MDR or MSSP to turn into a kind of cyber assessment firm. I don't think that's the goal. But if I'm trying to better understand how I can manage and deliver value on telemetry that my customers are providing, I want to make sure my team is not seeing duplicates. I want to make sure my team is not staring at the same set of data in 2 places, 3 places for no reason. And I want to make sure that what we're bringing in, what we're monitoring, what we're managing, what we're controlling is data that actually provides value. That is a conversation that needs to be had between you and your customers, and it's only going to make your team stronger. And that's another way to find value inside of your costs. I don't want you to take your pricing model and say, well, we're going to assess all of your tech stack, so therefore we're going to increase our cost by X, Y. It's a periodic thing. It's not an ongoing engagement. It's a periodic test to on sign on once a quarter, every 6 months, once a year, whatever it might be. We're going to take a look at the tech stack and evaluate and see where are we getting value from telemetry wise? Where are we adding value as your managed provider? And are there things we can do a little bit differently? Are there different telemetry sets we could look at? Are there options for us to maybe detect on something different? Are there opportunities for us to detect earlier in the adversary lifecycle? Are there opportunities for us to find additional value in sets that you may not even be thinking about from a telemetry perspective? I'll use a really quick case study. We actually see this with quite a few LimaCharlie customers, but they'll walk into an environment and sign a contract and get installed into an environment. And the immediate goal is, okay, as a managed provider, here's the technology that my team works off of. You need to install all of these things in order to be successful. That's kind of scalable, kind of. I'm hoping that you're utilizing a scalable and flexible platform in the background to help work on that data and that kind of stuff, right? One. Two, that doesn't necessarily address the needs that your customers have. It doesn't necessarily address the position that your customers are in. We've got a few managed providers here who are customers of LimaCharlie. They utilize us for a scalable, flexible platform where they're able to bring in and ingest and monitor off of any data set that they want. API integrations are easy. Data integrations are easy. Detection and response is easy. Where they find value is being able to go to their customers and say, what is it you're doing? Or what is it we can help you provide a little bit more insight into? Most organizations out there, they have all sorts of tech stacks and setups that they might not understand what it means or what it can do for them. Biggest case study I see a lot is there are plenty of organizations out there that have really extensive Microsoft tech stacks. And I mean, not managed, not MDRs or MSSPs, their customer base has an extensive Microsoft footprint, whether it's cloud development, whether it's Entra ID / Active Directory, whether it's Microsoft 365. And I don't think it comes as a surprise to anybody, but extending your services to say, we can also monitor that thing for you, but also recognizing from a technology perspective, the additional value you add is actually monitoring closer to an adversary entrance point. And I think that needs to be an important distinction here, is that I want to put myself and put my monitoring, put my team closer to where an incident may actually begin and occur instead of further away. So by moving kind of up the stream of telemetry, and I don't know, maybe we'll just coin a term there, and instead of, that shift left is going to be everyone's favorite thought here. But instead of thinking about, okay, let me follow my typical practices, are there ways for us to expand or maybe look at something different that moves us further up the adversary lifecycle that adds a little bit more value with minimal overhead? That's going to be an easy answer if you have the platform that can scale and meet those needs. So that's kind of like my continued call to action here. If you're looking in 2025 to scale up your services and scale up your value, folks, I want you to only look at platforms that offer you the ability to do that. Don't settle for some other vendor's tech stack and limit where your team can actually add value to others. The last little piece I've got here to discuss, because we are running down to the last couple of minutes of today's webinar, is going to be selecting partners for long-term success. And of course, this is going to be where I want to put you in line with LimaCharlie as the platform. Our costs are super straightforward. We allow you to build pricing models based off of what it is your customers need and scale the pricing model accordingly. We allow you to find areas to add value and then focus on those, because we take care of the infrastructure side of things. As a managed company, as an MDR and MSSP, your job is not, well, let me keep the database up and running. Your job is not, let me keep the cloud infrastructure up and running. Your job is, let me provide value to my customers. Let us handle that infrastructure so you can build and grow accordingly. 1, 2, don't look for partners who may one day turn your client list into their target list. I covered this in the very beginning. We're not in the services business here at LimaCharlie, nor do we have any plans to be. That means when we go and we set up and we build a partnership, we're looking to build a foundation that we can both grow on top of together. Us from an infrastructure side, you from a services, from a value add perspective. Let's grow together as a unit, as opposed to wondering, is one day that technology company going to become my competitor? Not in the plans for us. I want to offer that up as like my final talking point for today's webinar. My final thing for 2025 is going to be taking a look at your pricing strategy, figuring out ways to add more value, figuring out ways to bring in more different sets of telemetry and add more value for your customers. If any of those things are going to boost you into another tier of data ingestion or another tier of pricing, go reconsider who your vendors are and how much they're charging you. Go reconsider, renegotiate, or come take a look at a platform like LimaCharlie and say, here's the use case I'm trying to do. Here's how I'm trying to grow. We've got a very popular case study. We've got a company who we work with who wanted to build out their own XDR offering. They did so in about 4 to 5 months, from idea, back of the napkin, drawing to public facing GA. We're ready to onboard. We're ready to roll customers out. If I can do that in 4 to 5 months with a company, imagine what we can do an entire year together. If we got to the table and said, I'm an MDR, I'm an MSSP, here's how I'm looking to grow, help me get here. And if there's a way for us to work together, we absolutely will. Folks, my name is Matt. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I know this was a quick 30 minutes, mostly me just kind of talking about strategies and price effectiveness, but I wanted to plant a few seeds in some things that I think we should be doing in 2025, ways that MDRs and MSSPs can potentially restructure, focus more on value, and then go find a platform that helps you deliver and get there. That's exactly what our SecOps Cloud platform was designed to do. It's designed to help you come to the table and say, what is it we want to do next? We'll help you get there. All right, with that said, thank you so much, everyone, for joining me. Always a pleasure when I get to share the webinar stage with our wonderful viewers out there. If you're watching the recording of this and you have any questions or anything you'd like to ask after the fact, please do me a favor and reach out via social media, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, Slack, whatever it might be. Happy to answer those questions. With that said, everyone, it is middle of December, almost middle of December. So if I don't talk to you before then, have a wonderful holiday season, whether you celebrate or not. And otherwise, hope to see you again soon, either at a conference or on another webinar. Thanks again, everyone. Take care.